Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the fourth and final day of ETS23. Thank you for sticking with us all this time, coming out here in the morning to get some final conversations about the energy industry. And we really appreciate all of you who've been here and who've been watching on the live stream. I'm Dylan Lockwood, Senior Editor of Zpryme, and thank you. And we're going to be kicking off today with a great conversation. I have here Christine King, the Director of the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear at the Idaho Research Laboratory. Give it up for Christine. Yeah, so we're here to have the nuclear conversation. It's been like hinted at, danced around, but we're really getting ready to dive into it. I'm excited. How about you, Christine?
I'm pretty excited to be here.
You might have to flip it up.
Of course, we need power.
Nice.
So no, I'm excited to be here. Sorry I wasn't here with you the rest of the week, but let's see what we can do first thing this morning.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a millennial, and like most millennials, the nuclear conversation was quiet by the time I was already an adult. Most of what I know about nuclear energy came from watching The Simpsons, and they called it our misunderstood friend, which is probably kind of apropos. So, Christine, how has the conversation around nuclear evolved in this era of increasing decarbonization?
So, unfortunately, pop culture doesn't always help nuclear. I will say the radioactive waste is not in barrels with green leaking goo. But if we want to talk more about that, we can. So the conversation is really changing. I think the way to think about nuclear energy as an enabling technology in our progress towards decarbonization. And as you know, if you've been looking at decarbonization, it's different in every region of the country, and everybody has different resources available to them. So nuclear becomes an excellent partner to allowing us to deploy as much renewables as we can, and as well as replace the fossil and still have the stability on the grid. And then as you go further into the decarbonization equation and really achieving a clean economy, the hardest sector out there right now is going to be our industrials. And that's the beauty of the new nuclear fleet that's being designed and demonstrated this decade, which is it's not just about producing electricity, it's about that thermal energy that you can dual purpose with. And how do we make use? So by being able to dual purpose, we have that flexibility and dispatchability that we don't have with our existing fleet.
And it's decarbonizing not just the grid, but all kinds of other stuff. Because we were talking about that over breakfast, and you're like, your background as a chemical engineer, and all the ways that like these kinds of technologies can help with other non-electrical energy processes. Can you expand a little on that?
Yeah. So yeah, my background is a chemical engineer, and if I was to put myself in the shoes of someone who's been producing high quality steel with a good profit margin, right? The last thing I would want to do is to have to redesign that process. But if you could give me the same input, right? If you could give me the same energy, but it's clean, then that's a conversion that I can get behind. It makes it easier to make that conversion. Recent announcements here in Texas have been Dow Chemical is going to build one of the first demonstration, a high temperature gas reactor with X energy. And that is 100% about decarbonizing their industrial processes.
So to kind of prompt the question of the session title, do you see the role of nuclear in the grid as playing sort of a different part than in previous incarnations? And what does a nuclear inclusive future grid look like?
So again, I think a nuclear inclusive grid is different in different parts of the country. So let's talk first about states with aggressive decarbonization goals. Where nuclear plays a role, and I mentioned this before, is a partner to that reliability and backup to renewables. And I also think it's fair to say, I'm going to sit here and talk about nuclear because this is my 30th year in nuclear, so clearly I like this technology. But energy just in general, there is not one part of energy today that is not being innovated. So I think as we progress to a clean economy as energy professionals, we need to keep all of the above, right? If we end up in a clean economy, to me, you have a diverse power supply, right? Because our climate is going to change and our needs are going to change along the way. So I see coming back to a state with aggressive decarbonization goals and wanting to do that quickly, the challenge becomes you get to about 80 to 85% of a decarbonization going to 100%. And you're challenged with overbuilding to get the same performance. And that's where nuclear or long-term storage batteries can come into play, right? Carbon capture and sequestration, if we could get that to something that is economical to deploy as well, that could come into play. Where it's different is our states that are economically dependent on fossil fuels. So think about Wyoming and Kentucky and Pennsylvania and West Virginia. These are coal states. So fossil fuels is the center point of their economy. So when you're talking in those states, you need to be engaging with economic transformation. How do they continue to be energy exporters and industrial and manufacturing centers, but do it with clean energy? And in those states, that's where nuclear can be, again, because of that dual purpose, supporting the increased electricity demands, but also helping provide clean electricity for industrial processes.
So, what you were talking, you were talking about how you were talking about like the different, how we're innovating different aspects of the grid, different technologies and generations. We haven't had much nuclear discussion yet at the conference, so I'm curious what some of those innovations and technologies are. How is the actual like processes and look of nuclear changing?
So what's different, and I apologize, I didn't answer that question just before, but thank you for reminding me. So what's really different, so when you think about a nuclear power plant today, you're probably the first thing that comes to mind is the hyperbolic cooling towers, right? Everybody that and the containment domes. So what's different is we're building much smaller units and designing much smaller units. That's going to enable a couple of things. One, again, kind of going back to replacing fossil fuels and coal, because of the smaller plants, we'll have a smaller footprint. And we'll also actually match the grid capacity for many of these fossil fuel stations. So our mid-sized units are somewhere between 300 to 500 megawatts, which is about half the size of our existing fleet today. The other aspect is they're being designed with flexibility and dispatchability in mind, which is what we all need in a grid of the future, right? We need all of our resources to be able to operate on fast ramp rates. And that's not something that we have with our large light water reactors today. The other really interesting piece, if you go to all the way to the smallest end of our scale and you think about microreactors, microreactors are in the 1 to 5 megawatt range. And this is where you can really start to get into distributed grids and building in remote locations. One of the demonstration projects that's underway right now is with the Department of Defense. It's called Project Pele, P-E-L-E. And they are embarking on having a transportable microreactor to support their defense. And this is not for the energy that it provides, but by eliminating the need to transport diesel to the front line for energy, it actually saves lives on the field. So there's a lot of different products which nuclear hasn't had in the past.
Sorry, you said transportable, and then you said it was like replacing a diesel truck. How big are we talking, actually?
So these reactors are envisioned to be in the back of an 18-wheeler.
Wow. So, one of the things, when people talk about nuclear, there's a lot of like key issues that I think people still get kind of apprehensive about, like costs, scalability, but also like safety and fuel acquisition, and of course the waste in the oozing out of the barrels on the cartoons like you were talking about. So how have folks in the nuclear sector been addressing some of these issues, and what progress is still being hammered out?
Well, so we talked about this at breakfast as well. One of the challenges for the nuclear industry is we've kind of been flying under the radar for decades, right? We've been a consistent part of supplying power in the United States and internationally, but we've insulated ourselves as an industry. And so we haven't done a good job speaking publicly about our technology. And that's something that I personally spend a lot of time trying to change. I love my nuclear colleagues, but most of the time they start with 15 decimal points in their pocket, and they want to tell you about their really cool reactor technology that they're building, instead of how you might envision using that technology and how it fits in, right? And I think that's one of the most important parts. So you had a lot stacked in that question, so I'm going to start to break it down.
Yeah, for sure.
So from a safety perspective, I think, this industry, I kind of liken it to airplanes. Unfortunately, though, when you get on the airplane, like the pilot doesn't remind you about their safety record. That's, you have a safety briefing, right? But it's not, hey, our safety record has been really good. I think in nuclear, we need to actually stop talking about our safety. Our safety record is second to none. And in terms of energy density and the amount of energy we provide versus any safety incidents, to whether it's to our workers or to the public, that's, like I said, that's a record second to none. And with these new reactors, we're taking advantage of the actual physics. So in some cases, some of these reactors are being designed such that as the temperature increases, the reaction will naturally shut itself down. Or we're engineering them in such a way that the heat is, if you were to lose all power to the station, the water would continue to circulate and cool the core through natural circulation. So those things being incorporated into our new designs makes a big difference as well. All right, I'm going to skip to the end, and we're going to talk about waste, and then I'm going to come back to the beginning because I just want to kind of keep you guys awake and moving around. Okay, so going to the end about waste. Okay, so the Department of Energy has the obligation to come and pick up the nuclear waste, which they're not doing such a great job about. Please don't call my federal manager and tell them I said that. But where we are is we are storing the nuclear waste at site, at each location. Okay, so let's go back to the green leaking goo. What is nuclear waste? Nuclear waste is actually a ceramic pellet inside tubes, zirconium tubes. Those tubes are about 30 to 40 feet long, and they're arranged in a square array of about 17 by 17. That's a fuel assembly. Okay, so we take those fuel assemblies, we cool them in the spent fuel pool for 5 years. When I say cool, that's about thermally cooling them, not radioactively cooling them. And the one thing to know about our waste today is there is a significant amount of fissile material. So there's a lot of potential energy still left in those fuel pellets, even after we've pulled them out of the core. So they spend about 5 years in the core, and we change out about a third of it every cycle, every 2 years. So after 5 years or so in the spent fuel pool, they get loaded into stainless steel casks. Those casks are, the water is pulled out, the air is pulled out, and inert gas is put in, and they're welded shut. That is then placed in either a vertical or a horizontal concrete cask. You can walk up and stand right next to it, and these are on concrete pads. They're waiting for the government to come and pick them up. So where are we with consolidated storage? How many know about Yucca Mountain? Okay, yeah, okay. So Yucca Mountain was the original place that we thought we would do geological disposal. With the decision not to pursue Yucca Mountain, the DOE has just initiated consent-based siting. That starts with setting up the framework, not having the conversation about where we want to put a consolidated waste facility, but setting the framework for how we have a public conversation and make that decision, and ensure that wherever that consolidated fuels facility is, that everyone is making an objective and conscious decision about that. Where we're headed with waste is really kind of, I think, an opportunity. As I mentioned, our current waste has a lot of fissile material, so we could close the fuel cycle in this country and recycle it. And in closing the fuel cycle, we can take the waste that we have today and turn it into inputs for these new advanced reactors. Many of these new advanced reactors are operating at a higher enrichment level. So today's reactors have about a 3 to 5% enrichment of uranium. The new ones will be up to 20% enrichment of uranium. So that's really kind of the opportunity that we have. That there's a big important decision, and we're not in Europe. There are several countries that are already reprocessing their waste and recycling. So it's from a technical point of view, we know how to do it. It's more of a national decision. Do we want to close our fuel cycle? That leads to, I think, what we've all come to realize, unfortunately, as a citizen. I think we've all learned more about energy independence and energy security. And that's an aspect as we move forward with nuclear, is understanding how this technology can help us achieve that as well. I think I covered all of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just wanted to, a couple things I wanted to just circle back to about what you said. So just to clarify, you were talking about these like consent-based disposal sites, which that's a good development. What sorts of areas are being looked at for these kinds of things? Like, I assume it's not just like a simple application process. I assume you're doing some outreach on this.
Well, so the outreach right now is really about setting the framework for what that conversation will be, and how that public conversation should happen, which I think is a great, so I'm sure as you guys have issued RFPs, one of the first things you do right before you receive your proposals is decide what your scoring criteria is going to be. It's kind of like that. Like, before we get into the conversation, let's decide what is the right way to measure this? What is the right way to make this decision? I think I'll have to get back. I'll get back to you on this, but I do believe the comment process is open on consent-based siting right now. That is an open conversation. I hesitate because this, while I'm talking about this and aware of this, this is not an area I work in.
I see. You were talking about safety, like the high safety record, and then energy security and things like that. One thing that can make those conversations difficult for someone in your position is the idea that, like, the safety rate can be really high at these places, at nuclear facilities, but when there are failures or disasters or sometimes targeted sabotage, like you see you saw attempted in like Ukraine and stuff, those can be catastrophic to communities and ecosystems for decades. Like, they're very famous examples that I don't need to go over. So that I think scares people. So how do you have that kind of conversation when people have that rejoinder to the admirable safety records you mentioned earlier?
So you can't hide behind your safety record.
Right.
Okay. I mean, and we do have to be honest about the challenges associated with this technology. I will say the design in and of itself is your first barriers. There's also a fair amount of misunderstanding in terms of the actual impact. So again, pop culture hasn't necessarily been our friend. The Chernobyl series and the 3 Mile Island series, okay, how many people watch those? Okay. The nuclear industry has also published, as politely as we could, some, okay, so this is real, this part is not real. You know, they are making movies. All of that, though, it starts with not hiding behind that safety record, acknowledging that it is absolutely natural given where we've been and where nuclear came from. Nuclear, most people, I mean, I know you know it from Homer Simpson, but most people, especially in the United States, know it from weapons. Right? We tie nuclear technology to weapons, and we have not done a good job of differentiating. And there is a very large difference between the nuclear technology that you use to develop weapons versus what you use for commercial and peaceful use. And we have had a lot of successful peaceful uses of the technology. But we have to engage in that conversation. You cannot set aside someone's fears. My hope in the work that I do is, as I go out and talk about nuclear technology, is that it's especially something like this. This is the first conversation, right? I want to create a curiosity in the technology so that you can become comfortable with it and make an objective and conscious choice to host it. If you're not comfortable with the technology, I think you move on to something else. I think that's the right thing to do. Any technology that people are hosting in their community, they need to be comfortable with it.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think that's right. I think that's the best way to have a conversation is honesty, and yeah, understanding that risk factor. So we have a little bit of time left. I did want to know if anyone has any questions for Christine. We got one in the back here.
I'm glad you can see that. These lights are kind of bright. Oh,
Yeah,
hi.
it's my
Hi. Good morning. My name is Gail Wooster. I'm from Power System Consulting. And you were talking about Pele and some of these advanced reactors. All through the week, we've talked about the pace of change. And I love the idea of having a really diverse generation mix, but how long do you think it's going to take, if you could predict, for some of these advanced reactors to actually be available?
So we are in what I would call the decade of demonstration. And really where we are as a market is we have a good number of demonstration projects going on, full scale commercial demonstration projects going on. And what needs to happen, though, is unfortunately, nobody wants to be number 2, number 3, right? Everybody wants to buy the 10th unit, just like we saw with renewables, right? You need to drive. That's where we are in nuclear technology today, is looking for what is our early adopters, right? And how do we start building beyond these first units of these advanced reactors? If I was to make a prediction, I believe, I'll talk about the momentum I'm seeing in the states. There are 12 states that have initiated advanced nuclear feasibility studies. And that was just in legislation last year. We haven't closed the legislative calendars for 23 for many states. And we're seeing more states that are diving in to understand how this might fit in to a regional plan. I say all of that to say we've never seen this amount of momentum for nuclear. I believe we will be ready for scale and deployment in 10 years.
Thank you for the question.
And you can bring me back for the 20th anniversary and we can check on that
Yes.
prediction.
Well, yeah, we'll see in 10 years to see how that's going. Any other audience questions? Oh, we got one over here.
Hi, you mentioned how difficult it is to be a 2 and 3, but what do you see from a federal level as we're seeing so much money coming out for lots of energy initiatives? Is there money that you expect will be coming towards some of these nuclear technologies as we look at all of the IIJA and IRAs, all of those?
Yeah, there's a significant amount of money, and what I like about the federal policies that are coming out is that they're actually, for once, listening, and they're technology agnostic, right? So we're talking about the parameters of what we want, right? We want clean, affordable, reliable energy. And if you fit those profiles, no matter the technology, there's dollars for demonstration, there's tax incentives. So the IRA put out a production tax credit for clean energy. So 10% if you're building new clean energy, there's a 10% production tax credit you can get at the end of your project. What was announced earlier this week from the White House is if you are building that clean energy in a coal community, you can have another 10% production tax credit. That is the closest I have seen for clean energy being on sale ever, right? I mean, so I do think, and the work at the federal government level really is focused also on where are we going to do this. So it's not, which is very different for the Department of Energy and the national labs for us not to be just thinking about it at a global level, but really getting into the details of where are we going to do this? What does it look like in each region? How do we build models that help people do scenario planning? But yeah, I think the amount of dollars, I will tell you just one of the best things that they recently did, I think it was either in all these laws are starting to blur in my brain, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or the Inflation Reduction Act. It actually provided the funding for the completion of our 2 large advanced reactor demonstrations, one in Wyoming and now one here in Texas with Dow Chemical.
You said new clean energy, nuclear energy. I feel like there's a branding opportunity there.
Yeah, okay.
We got a question in the front here. We got one over there. We got one over there, and we got one over here. All right.
Hi, can you say a little bit more about the water demands of these new technologies?
Yeah, great question. And so there's twofold. One, I'll give you some statistics from the Wyoming project. That's TerraPower. They're building adjacent to the Naughton coal station. They will use 2/3 of the water that the coal station uses today to deliver the same amount of power. Now, the folks in Wyoming will tell you, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting, right? and that's the reality in the West, is being water constrained as we try to decarbonize. The other aspect is a lot of these technologies, you are able to actually operate air-cooled as well. You do pay a price on efficiency, but you could design and build them with air-cooled systems. You still will have some water usage, but the major water requirements would be reduced. But these new technologies will use equivalent or less water than our existing plants. Yeah, that's compared to current nuclear and current coal and gas requirements.
Excellent. I'm sorry, I know we have more audience questions, but we are out of time. But Christine's going to be around, so yeah, grab her ear, because I know from experience that you love talking about this stuff to people.
All right. Thank you so very much.
All right. Thank you, Christine.